The Texas air hung heavy like a wet wool blanket. Under the unforgiving 1835 sun, dust rose in lazy clouds with every hoofbeat. There were 12 soldiers, their uniforms once a proud, imposing blue, now looking like mere rags bleached by the tyranny of the climate. Leading them, astride a black stallion that exuded arrogance, was Captain Elias Rogers. His face was smooth, almost handsome, but his eyes held the chill of a viper. They halted before the modest wooden home of Samuel Hughes, a ranch that was little more than a promise of the future, planted with sweat and faith in the middle of nowhere. Samuel emerged onto the porch, calloused hands hanging at his sides, his shotgun deliberately left behind, leaning against the door. Beside him, Martha Whitman, his wife, watched with a silence that was more intimidating than any shout. "Mr. Hughes," Captain Rogers began, his voice dripping with a false veneer of civility, "I believe you received our communique. This land, by decree of our glorious President Santa Anna, has been re-annexed as property of the Mexican government. You and your family have 72 hours to vacate." The smile on his lips didn't reach his eyes. Samuel stepped forward, chin raised. "Captain, I have the deed, registered in San Felipe. This land was bought and paid for. It's ours." He held out a paper yellowed by time. The seal of Austin's colony almost faded. Rogers didn't even deign to take it. With a swift gesture, one of his soldiers snatched the document from Samuel's hand and handed it to the captain. Rogers glanced at the paper, a cruel amusement dancing on his face. "This?" He laughed, a dry, sharp sound like broken glass. "This is just paper, senor. A piece of dead hope for men who think they can simply claim what isn't theirs." And then, with theatrical slowness, he tore the deed in two, then in four, and let the pieces fall into the dust, where the wind scattered them like dead leaves. Samuel's heart sank. That paper wasn't just ink and pulp. It was his father's testament, his own sweat, Martha's dream. He glanced at the small grave marked by a wooden cross beneath the old oak, where their son, lost to fever the previous winter, rested. "This is an act of tyranny, not law," Martha said, her voice firm, cutting through the tension. Captain Rogers turned his gaze to her, a glint of contempt appearing. "The law, senora, is me, and my law says you are squatters. 3 days." He tugged at his horse's reins, preparing to leave. "Don't make me come back with less patience." As the troop rode away, kicking up a curtain of dust that seemed to choke the very sun, Samuel felt a wave of icy powerlessness. He'd seen the arrogance of men like Rogers before, in small gestures, in unfair taxes, in patrols that treated settlers like cattle. A quick flashback hit him. Months earlier, in town, he'd heard Rogers bragging in a cantina about how the Texians were weak, a people of farmers who knew nothing of war or power. At the time, Samuel had dismissed it. Believing in justice, in law, in the agreements made, he believed in the promise of Texas. What a fool he had been. That night, under an indifferent, starry sky, the silence in the Hughes home was as heavy as a tombstone. Martha cleaned an old shotgun, not out of necessity, but to keep her hands busy, to fight against the despair that threatened to engulf them. Samuel stared at the horizon, at the road the soldiers had taken. Fighting was suicide. Fleeing was admitting defeat, spitting on his son's grave and the future of anyone else who might come. He felt trapped, a cornered animal. Then something stirred in his memory, a voice, a face weathered by sun and wisdom, a man who had taught him years ago to track a bear not by its size, but by its arrogance. A man who believed true strength lay not in the number of rifles, but in the conviction of those who wielded them. The name was almost a legend, a whisper of hope in the dark Texas nights. Without a word to Martha, Samuel went to the stable. He saddled his toughest horse, packed a bag of provisions and a canteen of water. He didn't know if he'd find him or if the man would even remember him, but it was the only chance left. If you think an ordinary man can't face power, just wait and see what happens when honor is wounded. Samuel's journey was a test of endurance and faith. He rode for 2 days, eating little, sleeping less, guided by rumors and old memories. The sun beat down on his back and doubt gnawed at his mind. With every mile, the image of Captain Rogers' mocking smile spurred him on. He imagined Martha, alone, facing the deadline. The injustice wasn't just the loss of the land, it was the humiliation, the act of crushing a man's dignity in front of his family, of treating his labor and his life like dust. Back at the ranch, the presence of the Mexican army grew more oppressive. Patrols passed every few hours, the soldiers looking at the house with a mixture of boredom and superiority. Captain Rogers made sure to camp less than a mile away, a constant reminder of his power. He wanted to break their spirit before he even broke down the door. On one of his unannounced visits, he found Martha at the well. "Your stubbornness is admirable, Senora, but reckless," he said, dismounting. "Your husband has abandoned you." A wise man would know when to retreat. Martha met his gaze, her eyes sparking. "My husband is not a coward. He has gone to seek justice, something men like you don't understand." Rogers laughed, genuinely amused. "Justice? Here? The only justice is the point of my sword." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "I advise you to start packing. I would not wish to have to remove you by force." Meanwhile, Samuel had finally found what he was looking for. In an isolated cabin near a winding creek lived a man whom Texas was already beginning to call a legend, Davy Crockett. He wasn't the giant of the tales. He was a middle-aged man with broad shoulders from a lifetime of work and a gaze that seemed to see through people straight into their intentions. He was cleaning his famous rifle, Old Betsy, when Samuel approached, exhausted and almost hopeless. Crockett recognized him. "Samuel Hughes, you look like you rode straight from hell." Samuel told his story, his voice choked with anger and fatigue. He spoke of the torn deed, the threat to his wife, the captain's smile. Crockett listened in silence, his face impassive. Only the tightening of his hand on the rifle's stock betrayed his emotion. When Samuel finished, a deep silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of the creek. Crockett looked toward the horizon, as if seeing not just Samuel's predicament, but the fate of all Texas in this small story of tyranny. A brief flashback struck him, a conversation with Sam Houston years before. "They will test us, Davy," Houston had said. "They will pinch, push, take small things to see how far they can go before we react." Crockett realized that moment had arrived. He turned to Samuel. His decision was not just for an old acquaintance, but for principle. Freedom wasn't a gift. It was a fence that needed mending every day. "This Captain Rogers," Crockett said, his voice calm, but with the weight of granite. "Does he like to show off?" Samuel nodded. "He thinks he's a king, likes to be seen, to be feared." Crockett smiled for the first time, a thin, cunning smile. "Men who like the stage generally don't like surprises backstage." He didn't grab a powder horn or call for men. Instead, he began to ask questions. "How many men does he have? Do they patrol in groups? Where do they camp? What's his routine? Does he drink? Does he receive mail?" Samuel, confused, answered everything he knew. He expected Crockett to plan a fight, an ambush, but the legendary frontiersman was planning something else. something that didn't require a single shot. Crockett was sharpening a far deadlier weapon than any rifle, the captain's own arrogance. Every humiliation Samuel had suffered planted something new within him, something that grew stronger than fear. And watching Crockett's mind at work, he felt, for the first time in days, the seed of hope. The captain didn't know it, but by stepping onto that ranch, he had just awakened the wrong man. Crockett and Samuel didn't return to the ranch ostentatiously. They became ghosts in the Texan landscape, using the knowledge of the land that men like Captain Rogers despised. Crockett's plan was a war of nerves, a campaign fought in the shadows of the enemy's mind. The first phase was subtle. Using his hunter's skills, Crockett created signs of a much larger presence than reality. During the night, the sentries of the Mexican camp began to hear strange noises in the woods. A twig snapping here, a call of a night bird not native to the region there. At dawn, they would find tracks of dozens of boots which mysteriously appeared near the perimeter and disappeared into rocky terrain. It was Samuel and Crockett, using multiple pairs of old boots and walking in circles to multiply their presence. Paranoia began to set in among the soldiers. They, who felt like conquerors, now felt watched. The captain publicly dismissed his men's fears, calling them superstitious, but even he began to look over his shoulder more often. The key ally, as Crockett had predicted, was Martha. Through an old friend working in town, Samuel managed to pass a message to her. Martha, with her silent courage, became their eyes and ears. She closely observed Roger's routine. She noticed that every Wednesday, a lone messenger arrived from San Antonio with dispatches and left the next morning with the captain's reports. She also noted Roger's vanity. He spent hours polishing his boots and sword and publicly humiliated any soldier whose uniform was dirty. He wasn't a leader. He was a foreman ruling by fear. The following Wednesday, Crockett and Samuel prepared a simple trap on the road. It wasn't meant to injure, but to delay. The messenger's horse stumbled on a well-placed rope, and the man fell without injury. As Samuel helped him up, pretending to be a concerned farmer, Crockett, hidden, quickly swapped the captain's leather pouch for an identical one, containing worthless papers. Back at their hideout, they read Roger's reports, and it was there that Crockett found the key. The captain was lying shamelessly to his superiors. He described the region as violent and rebellious, justifying the need for more funds, which, as Crockett suspected, largely ended up in his own pockets. He also complained about the incompetence and cowardice of his own men, blaming them for incidents he himself invented. It was the document of an insecure tyrant, desperate to appear strong. The third small victory was an act of pure Texan cunning. Crockett knew every stream and spring in that land. With a few hours of work, diverting a small stream upstream, he reduced the volume of the Mexican camp's well to a muddy trickle. The lack of fresh water under the scorching heat did more to undermine the soldiers' morale than any threat of battle. Complaints began to bubble up, and Roger's leadership, already shaken by paranoia, began to crack. The 3-day deadline had arrived. The sun rose hot and relentless. In the camp, tension was palpable. The soldiers were tired, thirsty, and scared. Captain Rogers, however, was determined to make his show of power. He gathered his men, his face a mask of controlled fury, and marched toward the Hughes Ranch to fulfill his promise. He expected to find a family in tears or an abandoned house. He found neither. As the sun rose over the hills, no one noticed the lone rider departing towards the fort with a copy of Roger's letters, but Crockett would have recognized him, the look of one who does not return without justice. Captain Elias Rogers arrived at the ranch with the arrogance of a conqueror. His men, though nervous and disgruntled, formed an intimidating line before the silent wooden house. "Hughes!" Rogers shouted, his voice echoing in the morning stillness. "Your time is up. Come out with your wife, or I swear I'll burn this house to ashes with you inside." There was no response. The silence was deep, almost defiant. A sneer formed on the captain's lips. He interpreted the silence as surrender. "Coward," he muttered. He gestured to two of his men. "Break down the door. Take what's valuable. The rest is firewood." The soldiers hesitated for a moment, exchanging uneasy glances, but the order was clear. As the first man raised his foot to kick the door, Crockett's voice rang out, calm and clear, from the darkness of the adjacent barn. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, son." All eyes turned to the figure emerging slowly from the shadows. It was just one man, dressed simply, holding nothing but a sheaf of papers in one hand. Davy Crockett stopped a few yards from the troop, his gaze fixed not on the soldiers, but directly on the captain. Rogers blinked, surprised, then let out a hearty laugh. "And who are you?" "The ghost that's been scaring my men? An old hunter come to defend this miserable shack?" He looked around, expecting his men to laugh with him, but they remained silent, watching the scene with a strange apprehension. "You in what army, old man?" Rogers taunted. Crockett gave a small smile, the one Samuel knew well. "Ta-da!" Smile of one who had already seen bigger bears fall. "I don't need an army, Captain. I just need a good story. And lucky for me, you wrote it yourself." With a deliberate move, Crockett unfolded one of the papers. It was Captain Rogers' report to his commander in a loud, firm voice, so every soldier could hear. He began to read. "The rebellion here is widespread," Crockett declaimed. "The settlers are savages, and my men, sadly, are of a weak stock. Their cowardice in the face of danger has been a constant disappointment." Rogers' face turned from red to white. He tried to yell for Crockett to be silent, but the seed of doubt had been sown. The soldiers, who had endured the heat, the thirst, and the fear, now heard their leader describing them as cowards to save his own skin and get more money. Crockett continued, reading the passages about embezzled funds, invented battles, and the fabricated incompetence of his subordinates. With every word, Elias Rogers' armor of authority cracked a little more. His men no longer looked at Crockett as the enemy. They looked at their own captain with growing contempt. Their loyalty was to the Mexican army, not to a liar and a thief. "This is just a copy, Captain," Crockett said, folding the paper slowly. "The original, along with a letter from me explaining the situation, is already on its way to San Antonio. It was carried by a very fast man with a very good horse. By now it should be reaching headquarters." The bluff was perfect. Truth was mixed with uncertainty, and for Rogers, the risk was too great. He looked at his men. He saw in their eyes no longer blind obedience, but judgment. He had lost control. His power came not from his uniform or his rank. It came from his men's belief in him, and that belief had turned to dust. Crockett delivered the final blow, his voice low, almost like advice. "You have two options. You can stay and try to explain these letters to the general, or you can mount your fine horse and ride away and never set foot in Texas again. I, if I were you, would choose the second." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, his hands trembling with rage and humiliation, Elias Rogers dropped the torch he held. Without a word, without looking at his men, he turned, mounted his black stallion, and galloped away, disappearing in a cloud of dust and shame. When the imaginary people gathered in the square and saw the captain leave alone, no one cheered. They simply tipped their hats in respect for the man who brought justice without shedding hate. With the departure of their corrupt leader, the Mexican troop was disoriented. The lieutenant, an older, pragmatic man, approached Crockett cautiously. There was no hostility in his gaze, only weariness. The fight had left them along with their respect for the captain. After a brief, tense negotiation, it was decided that the soldiers would return to their garrison. The dispute over Samuel Hughes's land had ended, not with the sound of gunfire, but with the weight of truth. Samuel and Martha emerged from the house, where they had hidden throughout the confrontation, and watched the soldiers withdraw peacefully. The ranch, which hours earlier had been on the brink of destruction, was now secure, bathed in the soft light of late afternoon. The peace they felt was deep and lasting. Months later, a passing merchant brought news. Elias Rogers had been officially declared a deserter. Rumors said he had been seen in a frontier town, a broken man, living by card games and cheap whiskey, haunted not by ghosts of war, but by the ghost of his own shattered pride. He hadn't been defeated by an army, but by his own lies. He tried to destroy that man, but ended up destroying himself. In Texas, true revenge is living free when the enemy lives shackled to his own past. Crockett didn't stay for thanks or praise. He shared a simple meal with Samuel and Martha, the taste of home cooking and silent victory being reward enough. Before leaving at dawn the next day, he placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Remember this, son. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that honor is worth more than it." With a nod, he mounted his horse and rode off, disappearing into the horizon as discreetly as he had arrived. Samuel Hughes was never the same. The experience transformed him from a simple farmer into a pillar of his community. He learned that freedom wasn't guaranteed by distant papers or laws, but defended by the courage of ordinary men and women willing to stand tall when tyranny knocks at the door. His story, told around campfires and at settler gatherings, became a small chapter in the grand saga of Texas, a reminder that true strength lies not in the sword, but in character. Those who died for this land still live in every sunset, in every ranch, in every prayer. Texas belongs not to the ruler, but to the one who stands their ground. A year later, he returned to the hill where it all began. The old oak was still there, and the wind seemed to whisper the same name, Crockett. If you enjoyed this story and identify with the pride in your roots, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Share it with those who, like you, value history and courage. And comment below from where you are watching. We want to know how far Mexican pride reaches.